Hello and welcome to another episode of the Open Banking Expo Infocus webinar series. I'm Ellie Duncan, Head of Content at Open Banking Expo, and for this episode I'm delighted to be joined by Matt Jackson, who is Vice President of Partner Management at Token, and Cormarmac Bane, Product Manager at Global Payment. We're going to hear from Cormac and Matt about merchant adoption of bank payment, or pay by bank as it's sometimes known. We'll hear from them about leaning into the verticals the product is most suited to, where the opportunities lie in other verticals, and the pain points that are preventing wider adoption. We'll also discuss how merchants that have already implemented this payment type can optimize it further to get results by generating awareness around the customer journey. So lots to talk about, and we're going to dive straight in. Matt and Cormac, welcome to the webinar. I'd like you both to introduce yourselves if you can, and your respective companies as well. So let's start with you, Matt.
Thanks, Ellie. Really great to be here. So at Token, we are here to mainstream account-to-account payments, and that's our sole focus. But we invest really heavily in providing really high-quality infrastructure to global banks and global payment service providers like Global Payments, so that they can bring those capabilities to bear to their merchants. My team specifically manages all of our client relationships, and of which Global Payments is a really key one.
Great. And Cormac, over to you.
Thank you, Ellie, and thank you for having us. Yes, so as you mentioned, I'm a product manager at Global Payments, and I focus specifically on open banking. I've worked with Token for the last number of years in the initial development of the product, when we brought it live and brought it to market. And over the last few years, we've been looking at that go-to-market and scale of product as we work with our existing customers and new customers on the adoption of bank payment. And Global Payments, from a wider perspective, the bread and butter is typically card payments, but the company is Global Payments, not Global Card Payments. And we're always looking at what payment products our customers want, what consumers use to pay. So we're based in many different markets around the world, and that varies market by market. So from a Global Payments perspective, we have launched bank payment in the UK, but we also have open banking products across Europe, between Poland, Czech Republic, and looking at other markets such as Ireland and Spain. So yeah, and I think the broader picture of account-to-account payments that Matt mentioned as well, outside of Europe, there's a lot happening that Global Payments are looking at as well.
Yeah, and on that actually, can you tell us a little bit more about that offering of yours, bank payment? So what it is and how it works?
Yes, so in terms of open banking at a high level, the product and the value add of open banking in terms of a lower cost alternative to card payments without chargeback risks and a slick and consistent customer journey. Very consistent across what you'd see in the market. I think from a Global Payments perspective, the value and unique part of our product is effectively behind the scenes and all the fun stuff like reconciliation and having all your payment methods in one place. So when we built out the product initially, it's not just having it as a product on the gateway, it's also how does the funding mechanism work and how do we bill our customers and how do we make that as consistent as possible along with card payments and other payment methods. So it's a customer journey in a way that we offer it up on our hosted payment page in a way where the merchant decides what payment methods they wish to choose from and giving that choice to their payers. The customer journey is powered by Token. The consumer will select their bank within the Token journey, and all the banking connections are done via Token. And then from our perspective, when the consumer finishes the journey, we get the messaging back. We try to reflect this as accurately and consistently as possible with with other payment methods behind the scenes. I think that's kind of the high level view of bank payment.
Well, Matt, let's find out from you a little bit more about that relationship between Token and Global Payments. So, how did that partnership come to fruition?
So our partnership's been going for I think nearly 5 years now. I've obviously not been around for most of that, but as with any provider in this space, global payments are a key target because of their scale, their maturity, and ultimately their ambition. I've only been around for 6 months here at Token, but across my career, I've worked with Cormac's colleagues, and the recurring theme with them has always been around the true nature of partnership. The scale I spoke about earlier means that when Global Payments makes a decision on a partner or a feature, it's really well considered, it's really thorough, and a high quality and high standard is something that's really important to them. And that really resonates with Token. So we spent a lot of time building together with Global Payments, and we know that what's ultimately available to their merchants will be secure, scalable, and of the highest quality. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how it's not just the initial integration, it's the work afterwards. It's educating the merchant, helping the merchant educate their consumers on an emergent payment method. And that's where I think we've really hit the sweet spot with Global Payments and found success with bringing that feature to market.
Mhm. Yeah, as you say, that's really the theme of this webinar episode, actually. And let's get straight on with that, really, by looking a little bit more closely at that merchant adoption piece then. So, Cormac, I'm going to come to you first on this, but what are some of the key features of bank payment more generally that could benefit merchants and their customers?
Yeah, so when we often think about open banking as an adoption piece, uh, the reasons our customers come to us or we speak to our customers about the product, it does vary. Uh, First and foremost, we typically get the scenario of payments are expensive and open banking is a lower cost alternative. Bringing that to life is probably one of the key drivers uh, behind product adoption. But it's wrong to say that that is the only reason. We've had so many use cases pop up and that are driven in totally different directions. The customer journey piece is an important one because with card payments, we see people popping in their digits and billing addresses and these sort of things that are not required for open banking. We also see with the open banking journey compared to card payments at times as well, when you have a 3DS2 challenge, you are being redirected to your bank one way or another. With open banking, it's a little bit more linear where you are clicking and being redirected in an app-to-app fashion rather than pop-up notifications or something like that might happen with 3DS. So the customer journey piece is one of the things that does pop up when the conversation starts. And to Matt's point about it, getting a strong and consistent customer journey often drives that uptake or drives the success around it. Some of the examples that we have around successful open banking adoption has been around the piece where if I add a button that says bank payment without any context, and we haven't had a huge amount of migration from card payments to bank payment in that situation. Creating a customer journey that does give that look and feel like a comfortable journey has driven success with a number of our customers. We had a case study recently with Virgin Money where we talked about their experiences with the journey, and again, the customer was at the heart of it because they were seeing a number of, let's say, complaints around card payments. People's balances were not being paid off on the same day as when they made the payment, and bank payment with their option of instant settlement resulted that the funds and the account balances were updating as and when. So the customer journey improved, but again, kind of going back to the behind the scenes, the actual settlement of funds improved the customer journey. So bringing to life these challenges and pain points that not that are necessary that our customers are facing, but that their payers are facing, has kind of piqued the interest of a number of our customers. And there are more pain points in that, and we can maybe touch on that in a while. But pain points to getting it live. But once it is live, it is solving a number of pain points for our customers and for their customers.
Yeah, and on those benefits, Matt, that Cormac has just kind of pointed out, bearing those in mind, which verticals does it mean this product is most suited to in your view?
It's a great question. I don't really agree that there's a particular vertical where this is most relevant. Really, when the consumer adoption is more mature, this payment method will be a significant part, I think, of any vertical's payment mix. It won't dominate. I don't think we're ever going to see a dominant payment method now, and that's personal opinion. Historically, we've seen the most traction in the industry and actually within our relationship with Global Payments in the FS vertical. But I really do think there's a lot more opportunity being left on the table. Conceptually, I think any vertical that's particularly margin sensitive will really benefit from focusing on pay by bank. And the one I always jump to in my mind is around that remittance and international money movement vertical. They've usually got digitally savvy consumers, people who understand digital journeys. They are looking to send money across the world, and those providers are generally working on around a 6% end-to-end margin. If you can enable pay by bank and then incentivize consumers to use that, you can get away from a card transaction fee, which is ad valorem and lets you use 1.5%, onto a pence or cents per transactions fee. And you've got the benefit of instant settlement and access to your funds. To me, that feels like a real slam dunk use case. But for all of the reasons Cormac mentioned, e-commerce is also a great use case. And I think we will see that vertical adoption increase rapidly over the next sort of 6 to 12 months.
What about you, Cormac? Would you agree there with what Matt said about kind of verticals that this is not suited to?
I would say yes, in terms of it has the potential to get there, but I think there's a timing piece to it as well. And to Matt's point, there has been success in certain verticals like that, financial institutions, also the likes of utility companies, high ATV, average transaction value customers. That's where there is that kind of natural fit, especially to Matt's point about the cost side of things. Now, the one thing I'd probably say is in today's world, I don't think it's necessarily a silver bullet that's going to change every vertical in the short term. I think the thing that's going to help evolve this payment method over time is familiarity that people will have. So if you have a credit card with Virgin Money and you see the payment method there, but then you go on to, I saw recently that Ryanair launched Open Banking as a payment method. If you see it there, all of a sudden you might be saying, oh, I've used this before. It's now a little bit more familiar. I will use this in this setting. And a couple of other big merchants that I've seen have adopted it, the likes of, I think, Just Eat and Weatherspoons. These are opportunities for consumers to see the payment method outside of the verticals that Matt and I mentioned there. But I think it will just take a bit of time for consumers to see it over and over again, to become familiar with it to the point of actually deciding to click into it rather than card payments. And I think the other difference is within the payment method choice space is digital wallets is another big one where consumers are very, very familiar with digital wallets. And if they are faced with it side by side, we'll just say with Just Eat, they may default to how they've previously paid. So I think that with the evolution of open banking, the familiarity, I think it will go to many more verticals. But the doubling down on some of the existing verticals, I think, will help that evolve.
And on that point then, I mean, you mentioned a few bigger brands there, if you like, and companies, well-known kind of retail brands that have adopted this type of open banking payment method. Matt, where are we with merchant adoption, though? Can you kind of paint a bit of a picture there for us?
For sure. I think if we were having this conversation a few months ago, I would have painted a very different picture. But I really feel like the reality now is that we're starting to move to that mass awareness and adoption. Cormac mentioned a few big merchants just a second ago. But I think we're now seeing the shift of awareness in consumers, particularly in the UK, where the APIs and the UX in the journey is more mature. The Open Banking Impact Report released their 7th edition last week. And the two stats jumped out at me there, that the travel sector had grown by 230% and e-commerce by 500%. Now, they are starting from a very small base, but I think the thing that jumps out to me there is not necessarily the numbers, but they are two key verticals that will further grow that consumer awareness. So as Cormac mentioned, when consumers are using the payment method once and then they see it available again and try it again, that trickle effect will soon build up and hopefully become a flood.
Thanks, Matt. And in terms of Cormac pain points, I guess what are the pain points that you're seeing that prevent wider adoption among merchants and retailers?
Yes, and I think to Matt's point there about the adoption piece as well, we have seen a variety of merchants in terms of interest and pushing the adoption. Interest is strong, and there's no doubt about that. But how it's implemented adds a lot to the success of how the product is used and adopted. When we speak to customers and Token as well, speak to a lot of our customers, and there's no doubt about the interest in the product and bringing it to life and seeing the value in it. But the adoption sometimes ties into how much is put into it at the outset, and also getting tied up in other priorities and things like that. So we've seen the one end of the spectrum where we mentioned Virgin Money there, and they have 94% of their payers use bank payment versus card payments for credit card repayments. And that's an incredible example of it. But we do have customers as well that have added open banking, and they might have 5% of their payers using bank payment. But we also have a number of customers that have signed contracts and they're really happy to get it live, but it just hasn't happened yet. And it probably ties into your point there about pain points, Ellie. So I think a big part of it is the mindset when some of our net new customers come to us and they say, I got to get card payments done first, and then I look at bank payment. So that's an integration prioritization piece, and that's fine. And in many cases, they get to bank payment and it's added on alongside cards, and everything is great. But I think that mindset shift is something that, from a global payments perspective, we can help solve that pain point and making it easier to see all of the products at once rather than cards first, bank payment to follow. Some of the other pain points that were called out, so adding the product to the gateway and making a transaction happen is sometimes the easy point. And the difficult part is the stuff behind the scenes, tying back to what I mentioned earlier about global payments looking to solve for some of the reconciliation bits and all the back end noise that can happen with the payment. But as a result of that, uh, sometimes there can be more work for a merchant to do, and it's not just getting the product on the checkout, it's being able to handle the product after the fact. So that can create a bit of work for a merchant that differs to card payments at times. The age-old one of prioritization from a product perspective, I totally get it. And there are always conflicting priorities when it comes to deciding and adding a product. For some of our existing customers, this can be a big part of it as well, where ultimately it's not always a decision of bank payment versus doing something else with payments. So many of our customers, their payments is just a utility to them, and ultimately they just need payments to work, and they are going off selling their own products and making their own products better. So when it comes to adding in bank payment, it's not often a contention of bank payment versus digital wallets. Sometimes it's bank payment versus I need to make my checkout better for my insurance customers, or I need to make my checkout better for my selling laptops or something like this. Sometimes bank payment can fall behind that, and that's not a pain point for us or anything like that. That's a pain point for our merchants as well, because they're always fighting that contention internally as well. We also have that scenario of payments versus the other, and digital wallets often does come to the mind of a lot of our merchants before bank payment. And that might go down to the similarly the customer journey piece, but it doesn't solve for a lot of the other value adds that bank payment has. So I suppose to tie that all up, a big part of what us at Global Payments and Token are helping us with is to try and really solve for that and try and reduce those pain points, making it as easy for our merchants to add the product, take away a lot of that back end noise, and get our customers focusing on creating a good customer journey that they're happy with and doing it in the most efficient way possible. And maybe one final point on that is that every decision, and it kind of goes back to the roadmap piece, every decision that anyone makes, you often look at, if I'm going to add this product on, it's going to cost me X. And X is a bottom line number, and it has to be factored in. So a lot of the value add and the savings around open banking has to be driven by how quickly can we offset X by the savings of the product. So there's a curve ultimately that can be that highlights this, where we say merchant pumps this much money into the product, and at this point here we're going to see the savings, and ultimately going forward into the future it's going to be far more significant than it is versus that sweet spot. And sometimes it can be hard for our merchants to see that, and it's trying for us to bring that to life for them. And a big part of that is, if they put in all this work to do it, how many customers will adopt it? So that's a bit of an unknown beforehand. And if they know that there's going to be significant adoption, it becomes a very easy story to tell, or a business case to write, or something like that. But we have to try and help them support that scenario.
Yeah, I think what we're hearing, I guess, is that going live with bank payment or this type of payment method generally is just the first step, right? And actually, merchants will need to do a little bit more work. As you said, it takes time, doesn't it, for customers to become familiar enough with the payment method that they start using it regularly. So, Matt, I'll come to you on this. What would you say to merchants that have implemented open banking payments? They've got that offering on their checkout, but they now want to drive adoption among their customers.
I think Cormac touched on the point quite a lot in his last answer just there, which is always around the why. So why is the merchant implementing this? Is it to win net new customers? Is it to optimize their checkout? Is it to access their funds faster? And really that will always come down to understanding your customer. So where are they? What payment journeys are they used to? How do they like to be communicated to? Do you need to, or how can you educate them about what the process will look like, but also what benefits that it can bring to them? Maybe you might need to incentivize them. I think if you can answer all of those questions, you can very quickly develop a plan of how to optimize that adoption journey. Typically, we would see education campaigns across different platforms going out ahead of launch, and then you might invite a beta group to test the flow and iron out any wrinkles. But I think understanding that customer is the key for merchants when they're looking to drive adoption of any payment method, really.
Absolutely. And Cormac, I'm keen to hear from you a little bit more. I think you touched on this earlier, but where merchants have offered bank payments as the default, what results have they and you seen from approaching it in that way?
Yeah, it's funny. I think the key thing here is that adding the product is one thing, but it's an iterative process. And I suppose if you just add on bank payment by itself, we have seen anywhere from 5% to 20% adoption of bank payment just by putting on a button that says bank payment, and using our host a payment page in that, and that's fine, and that is the quickest path to market, and there's no doubt about that, and it adds value, and it's a way of dipping the toe in the water. But the key thing is that with any of the major successes we've had, there's a plan in advance to say, this is how it could look. Then we launch, and then we look at it, and we don't just look at it, we look at the data, and we try and understand how it's performing. Now, if we notice something is going really well, the landing page is quite good, and consumers are clicking in, there's still bits and pieces that we can do to evolve it. We can make it more bespoke and adding in logos and stuff like that can be done from our side. But what we've also found is that some of our merchants might disguise card payments a little bit more, and calling card payments the other payment method, making it prominent front and center, is obviously the way to go to make it as appeasing to your customers. But there's far more than that can be done in terms of putting in a page in advance to say, we're adding this payment method. Don't be scared. This is something new, but it's okay. Email campaigns is something as well that can be done in advance, but also can be done after the launch. And it's trying to identify what are those, what's your customer going to notice the most. And it does depend sometimes if they're repeat customers or if they're maybe one-off payers. That does impact on how you actually try and shape this to your customers. So yeah, we've seen the example where I think with Virgin Money, there was probably 4 different iterations of the customer journey post-launch over the first 4 months. That evolved month on month based on data, based on trying to understand. Again, these are repeat customers, so we had the insight. If a customer made a payment, did they repay using bank payment? Valuable insights that we can do. And I think the other thing as well is from a token and from global payments perspective, and we're working on this actually with a few of our enterprise customers at the moment as we look to help them in their launch. We try to create a kind of little team and launch team to try and work closely with them. With global payments, we have a good bit of experience with this from an open banking perspective, but Token have also done it with a number of their other customers as well. So there's a huge amount of learnings that can be taken from us and from Token to really try and optimize that from a merchant's perspective. And while we might have some ideas, we also know it's not one size fits all. So that's why I think every merchant launch has its own set of data that allows us to try and help. And what's perfect for one merchant is not perfect for another, because not every merchant will want 94% of payments via bank payment. Some might be saying, I just want a third bank payment, a third card, and a third digital wallet. So it's us working together with our merchants to try and understand that.
Yeah, as Cormac mentioned there, Matt, you've worked with a number of merchants on implementing this and growing adoption. So, what have you learned along the way about how merchants can sort of better create awareness around the customer journey in a way that's really effective?
I think the important thing, firstly, is that you don't just add the payment method and hope. That is a great way to guarantee slow uptake, awful conversion, and actually maybe damage the consumer's view of pay by bank more generally. Cormac touched on a really important point there, that sometimes a test and learn approach is the best way to do that. So pick a cohort of customers, try an education campaign with them, and then measure the response to that. And I'll just go back to it comes down to the merchant's relationship with their customers. So in some use cases, education screens or messages within the app will be perfectly fine and have really great results. And in others, you might want to contact your customers ahead of implementing the payment method and educate them via email campaigns or other social media. And as Cormac mentioned, both Global Payments and Token put a lot of time and effort into helping our customers with this, and anyone implementing Pay by Bank should expect this from their provider, and really make sure you hold people to account in getting the support you need, whether that's collateral or user journey testing from your service provider.
Well, I think you make a really important point there about that kind of test and learn period, if you like, and taking different perspectives or different approaches to this depending on the customers you're trying to target. Well, look, we touched on verticals earlier, those that have already kind of started adopting bank payment or pay by bank. What are the opportunities for other verticals to adopt this payment method, do you think? And what's going to drive that, Matt?
So the opportunities for any other vertical to adopt Pay by Bank really, I think, will hinge on riding the wave of consumer adoption. We've spoken today about some of the stats about the increase that we're seeing. That increase is being driven by merchants educating their consumers, but those consumers are now becoming more and more familiar with Pay by Bank as a payment method. I think there are new waves of consumers that will come in when commercial VRP launches towards the back end of this year, and they won't know it as Pay by Bank, but that flow, I think, will increase awareness and adoption of non-card, non-digital wallet payment methods. And I would really encourage any merchant now to start thinking about those flows and those journeys and start building for them now, because for us, we really think that is where the tidal wave of adoption will come.
And Cormac, anything to add in terms of verticals and where you see opportunities?
Yeah, I think what's also interesting as well is RFPs that are coming in over the last 2 years. More and more we're seeing it as a big part of the RFP. So what we are seeing with a lot of enterprise customers is that it is starting to become more and more part of the mindset, the default that when I'm thinking about my payments, I'm thinking about payments and not just thinking about card payments. And we've seen some open banking only RFPs as well, which makes me think as well that a lot of enterprise customers are thinking about open banking. So in terms of the verticals, I think I kind of mentioned this earlier as well, but in the short term, I think there will be a little bit of doubling down, and I think it's really important for the verticals that we have called out in terms of financial institutions and utilities and high ATVs. I think it's really important for them to get on the train in the very near future, because it is really a great match for them. But there are no limits to the product. And in terms of, like, we have some customers that on paper you would think, why did they want open banking? What brought them to life? And it's just, they thought about this for their consumers and they thought it would be a good payment method. There's no restrictions in terms of which verticals can target the product. But I think in the short term, it'll be a case of really doubling down on some of the customers that this is super suitable for. And I think the other one that is interesting and evolving, I think, is probably B2B payments as well. So business payments it's not maybe as easy as consumer payments, because it might be done by an accounts payable team or something like this. But those payments are potentially quite clunky as well, and there's something that bank payment, I think, can solve for too. And we do have B2B customers live, and it does work well. It might not do every payment because of the sizes of the business make it tricky for them to access online banking to push a payment. But it's definitely solving for a percentage of their payments. And it kind of goes back to that point about even if it's not going to move every payment method for a merchant from cards to bank payment, or even if it's not every vertical straight away adding bank payment, it's the evolution and the movement towards that. And the more adoption we see, the more familiarity with consumers, and the more it becomes table stakes for merchants, regardless of.
Mhm. Well, we've covered a lot of ground during this webinar, so just going to come to both of you in turn. What would you like merchants that have already implemented, either bank payments or an open banking payment method already, and they want to optimize adoption of it? What would you like them to take away from this webinar, Cormac?
I think having a little retro and reflection on the customer journey, looking at the data, trying to understand how your customers are paying today, some of the pain points that they have. And ultimately, from a global payments perspective, as I mentioned, and with Token, we're here to help and support that in terms of diving into the data, trying to help optimize that customer journey. One of the key points, I think, is that once it's launched, that doesn't mean that's it. There is the opportunity to iterate and evolve the product. So if it hasn't been done yet, now's the time to do it, and we're happy to help with that.
Great. And Matt?
I completely agree with everything Cormac just said. That continual development of the product, I think, is really important. To give another angle, I would encourage merchants to have a look at that consumer education piece. Now, It doesn't have to be extensive, but just letting consumers know that there is a new payment method and this is what it might look like and this is why it will be better for you or potentially interesting, I think is a really worthwhile exercise that is relatively low cost. And we've seen, and we have evidence of this, that it really will drive that adoption. And consider who your customers are and where they are and how they like to be informed, but do some consumer education and information, and I think it will really drive adoption of a payment method. And if you've implemented this payment method, you know the potential benefits for you as a merchant. So why not just do some education to your end consumers about?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really important. And all it leaves me to say is thank you so much, Matt and Cormac, for joining us for this webinar today. Great to hear from you both in terms of your experiences about how to create that awareness in the customer journey, or what it's going to kind of take to optimize bank payments as well. So great to hear from you both. Thank you very much. We hope you enjoyed that webinar and found it really informative. I know I certainly did. And all it leaves me to say is we hope you join us again for another episode very soon. Until next time, goodbye for now.